He's Howard Beck, New York Times, covering the Knicks. And I'm going to start with our poll question today, Howard. The Knicks will be better or worse when Melo returns?
That's a fun one. This goes in the benefit of the doubt category. Better. They should be better. I mean, Carmelo Anthony is still one of the best players in the game, one of the best scorers for sure in the game. Not always known as the best passer, not always known as the guy who's going to keep the ball moving. But Carmelo Anthony's had a good long time here to watch what's unfolding in front of him, to see the way this team is playing, not just to see what Jeremy Lin is doing, which I think people get confused about. It's not just what Jeremy Lin's doing, it's what the whole team is doing. It's the style of play. It's the style that was reminiscent of what the Knicks were doing before they made the trade for Carmelo. And I think he sees what's working. I think he sees the chemistry that's developed. And I think he's going to recognize that his best bet as a player, as a person, as a personality in this city is to just kind of get on board and do what everyone else is doing. And that's, participate in this offense, take advantage when he can, and let Jeremy Lin orchestrate.
Yeah, but I think it's got to be confusing for him because he was the man in high school, the man at Syracuse, the man in Denver, and the man in New York. I thought it was Amari's team, but Carmelo quickly took that over. So now he's sitting back going, gosh, now what am I supposed to do? How do I prove I'm a team player? Wait a minute. Who takes the last shot? I just think the more these guys think, the more in trouble they get.
There's a point to be made there. And especially in basketball, your best players are the ones who just go. You don't spend too much time pondering. You spend time pondering, now the defense is all over you. You make quick decisions. But to that point, Mike D'Antoni's offense is really about making quick decisions. When you get the ball, you either, pass, drive, or shoot. You don't sit there and hold it. You don't pound it into the ground. And you don't go ISO or post up very often. And Mike D'Antoni made a lot of concessions to Carmelo when he got here because I think he felt like he had to. But he also didn't have the point guard who could run it the way Steve Nash used to in Phoenix and the way that Jeremy Lin is now. And you're right. I mean, Carmelo's most comfortable being that one-on-one player, being the ISO guy and the post-up guy. But he also has a great mid-range game. He can shoot the three. He was shooting the three fantastically last year when he got here, when they still had a point guard with Chauncey Billups. So, Carmelo has other ways he can be effective in attack and still score a lot, and then use the one-on-one skills when the shot clock's running down or the quarter's running down. I mean, there will be those opportunities, and that's something they've been trying to get across to him this whole time. But I think it's been harder for the coaching staff to convince him to play that way, to be, participate in the offense for the first 18, 20 seconds, and then use your individual skills at the end. They haven't been able to convince him of that because the offense wasn't moving very well anyway. It was dysfunctional, and so he just figured, well, I've got to do it all then. Well, he doesn't have to now. And so, you're right. I mean, I'm not entirely convinced. I'm certainly not convinced it's going to be easy, but I do think that Carmelo Anthony is smart enough to recognize what's going on here and skilled enough to be able to fit his game back into what they're doing.
He's Howard Beck, New York Times, covering the New York Knicks, joining us for the Dan Patrick Show. I think there is a chance for Melo to actually be a better all-around player because of this style if he buys into it. Describe the atmosphere in the Garden last night.
It's incredible. Jeremy Lin is the second guy, I think they introduced last night during pregame introductions, because Amari is still last because he gets that honor. He's the guy who started this whole thing. But they're going crazy as soon as Jeremy Lin is announced. They go crazy for every play he makes, and there are a lot of really great plays last night, too, so that was easy to do. It's just the place is charged up right now in a way that it hadn't been in a while. And, it was really charged up when they first got Amari and then really charged up when they first got Carmelo. And then things didn't go so well for a lot of that. This is just different. The Garden is a place where you necessarily saw a lot of signs before or people bringing homemade props. Now you've got signs with Lin puns, and you got people with the photocopied Jeremy Lin faces on sticks. Just all kinds of things happening that, weren't happening at the Garden before. I'll tell you what, though, Dan, the really striking thing was the atmosphere the night before at Air Canada Center in Toronto, where it felt like a game at the Garden.
Yeah.
And when Jeremy Lin hit that shot at the end, the place went nuts.
Yeah, it seemed like there were more Knick fans there. I know it was Asian American night. Do you make anything out of this this story that was on NBC Sports where you had that Spanish national team where they made fun of Asian Americans in their team picture by having the slanty eyes, pulling their eyes back, and that here's Lynn, who's gone against three of those guys: Pau Gasol, Calderon, and Rubio, and he's, it's almost as if he's checking him off there. Do you think he's aware of this?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know. It hasn't come up. The idea of the ethnic backlash or just the static that he's gotten at times in his life, it hasn't come up much in the NBA. It came up a lot when he was in college. All the stories then were about how he would hear a lot of remarks on the court. It hasn't been an NBA issue, I don't think. And his race doesn't come up that much, except to the fact that there's a huge segment of the population that's pulling for him because he's Asian American. But on the flip side of it, the negative side of it, I don't think there's been much of that. Aside from Floyd Mayweather's comments, that he's only getting attention because he's Asian American. And with regard to that photo, I mean, that was years ago during the Olympics, wasn't it, or during the World Championships, something like that. I'm not sure that that's present in too many people's minds right now. And the guys who you mentioned, who he's kind of tearing up on the court, he's done it to a lot of guys of a lot of different backgrounds.
I have to ask you, okay, before I move on to one thing with Shaq, where do you see the Knicks as far as, in the power ranking here in the East right now?
Right now, they are no worse, take the records away, obviously. The way they're playing right now, they're no worse than top four. And that's without Carmelo. And I understand, look, that, in this 7-game streak, they've beaten a lot of really bad teams. But they also beat the Lakers very convincingly, and they beat the Utah Jazz, another, least winning team. And it's just the way they're playing right now. Their defense was already pretty decent before this streak. And the offense, ironically, was the problem. And now the offense has come around. And they're doing all this again, mostly without Amari up until the last 2 games, and entirely without Carmelo. I really believe that as long as Carmelo does fit back in, and again, benefit of the doubt, I think he will and can, I think they're right up there. Miami and Chicago are still the class of the East, but the jumble that's after that, there's some good, solid teams playing, really nice basketball right now, Indiana and Philadelphia, but we know that stars win in this league for the most part, and Indiana and Philadelphia are nice collections of players. But I think the Knicks, on all cylinders, with Jeremy Lin orchestrating an offense and Amari Stoudemire and Carmelo Anthony, in sync, the Knicks should be, no worse than top 4 playing-wise. Record-wise, they've got to climb still. Before
I let you go, I had to laugh when Shaq said that Dwight Howard should stay in Orlando. I read it over a couple of times. I couldn't help but laugh when I read it. Here's Shaq, of all people, and then he said he wanted to stay in Orlando when all of his teammates knew that he wanted to be a Laker. He wanted to be in Hollywood, and I've said this the last year and a half, that Dwight Howard, in his mind, has outgrown Orlando. He wants to be bigger than just a great basketball player. What did you take from that quote that Shaq said Dwight Howard should stay in Orlando?
I didn't see it live, but like you, I laughed as soon as I saw it. I mean, of all the people in the world to try to make this point, let's not forget that Shaq didn't just leave Orlando. Shaq would then deride it at every opportunity and what's referred to it as a dried-up little pond. So if that doesn't speak to what his mindset was, and that quote, was back in like 97, 98, 99, somewhere in there. If that didn't speak to what his mindset was about Orlando and how it was insufficient for him, I don't know what does.
And he has a problem with Dwight Howard.
He does. He does, and I think one of the reasons he'd want him to stay in Orlando is because I think he already resents that Dwight's been kind of copying his playbook with the Superman routine and everything else. He doesn't want him to go to L.A. and do what Shaq did. So it's funny. It's a little odd. I think the premise is right. It would be better for the league if Dwight stayed in Orlando, and if stars stayed with their teams in general rather than chasing each other around trying to hook up everywhere with other stars. But that's really funny coming from Shaq. But Shaq's a funny guy.
Good stuff, Howard. Enjoy the ride there. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
Howard Beck, New York Times.